Okay, well, hi everyone. Welcome to the Center for the Living City and our Spring 2022 lecture series, sponsored by the American Institute of Architects of Northeastern Pennsylvania and Marywood University School of Architecture. The talk today is titled, It Starts with Water, and it kicks off our Jane Jacobs Collegiate Consortium lectures, because this started in a classroom. This is a story of an idea that became a course in a university, that became an award-winning student design project, and then became a reality. And this took root in its community. I am Maria Mcdonald, Executive Director of the Center for the Living City. I am your host, joining you from Marywood University School of Architecture in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And we also have Chelsea Gauthier, Associate Director of the Center for the Living City, joining us in the background. You cannot see her. She's coming to us from Salt Lake City, and she is also a member of the board of the Seven Canyons Trust in Salt Lake. Our guest presenter today is Brian Tinetti. Brian Tinetti is a founder and executive director of the Seven Canyons Trust. It's a nonprofit working to uncover and restore the buried and impaired creeks of the Salt Lake Valley. As a student of Stephen Goldsmith's at the University of Utah, he was part of an award-winning team for a project titled 100 Years of Daylighting. That visioning document led to the creation of the Seven Canyons Trust in 2014. In his role, Brian led the implementation of the Three Creeks Confluence project, an award-winning effort to daylight Red Butte Emigration and Parley's Creeks, where they flow into the Jordan River in Salt Lake City, Utah. He graduated from the University of Utah with degrees in environmental and sustainable studies and urban planning. His passion for waterways developed out of a love for skiing, a frozen waterway. We are so pleased to have Brian as our first presenter for the Jane Jacobs Collegiate Consortium. He's then Professor Stephen Goldsmith, who was instrumental in this inception, is currently teaching with us in our first course in our Jane Jacobs Collegiate Consortium. So we have a student and teacher intersecting again in a very interesting way. And we are all the benefactors of your work. Brian, thank you for being here. We are so excited to hear you talk, and we're so looking forward to seeing what you have to show us. I'm going to disappear.
Absolutely.
and you're taking over, and we're going to talk for about 45 minutes. And please, everyone, while you're listening along, feel free to put questions into the chat, and we will look at them. And then when at 4:45, Brian, I'll come back on the screen, and Brian and I will take a bunch of questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Maria.
Thank you.
Let me share my screen and make sure that we're good to go on that. Can I just get confirmation that y'all can see that?
We can see it.
Great. Thank you. So thanks so much for that wonderful introduction, Maria. As mentioned, my name is Brian, and I am the executive director of a nonprofit organization called the Seven Canyons Trust. Our mission is to uncover and restore the buried and impaired creeks here in the Salt Lake Valley in Salt Lake County, Utah. And as Maria mentioned, we began in a 2014 University of Utah course taught by Professor Stephen Goldsmith, in which we were given this idea of stream restoration and stream daylighting with the ultimate goal of creating a visioning document, which we entitled 100 Years of Daylighting. So essentially looking at a century-long vision for the Salt Lake Valley streams. This document went on to win a Utah American Planning Association award, which basically spurred the creation of our organization, in that we had this award-winning document. So why not create an organization to implement said document? So we gathered the funding and applied for our 501c3 nonprofit IRS designation, which we received in April 2016. I worked nearly full time between kind of the inception of the organization in 2014 as a volunteer up until 2019 when I moved into a full-time position as the executive director of the organization. And I just wanted to emphasize this because the work you are doing as students today can truly create lasting change in your community and, may even lead to a full-time job. So what is this idea of stream daylighting? Daylighting is the uncovering of a stream previously buried in a pipe or culvert, typically aiming to kind of restore the stream to the most natural state possible. But this depends on kind of the factors upstream, the surrounding land use, and the space that we might have available. There's also kind of two other forms of daylighting, architectural daylighting, which kind of brings up the stream in more of an engineered channel, typically characterized by concrete creek beds and a concrete creek bank. And then this idea of cultural daylighting, which doesn't actually physically bring up any water, but brings up the idea of our underground waterways kind of to the collective consciousness, if you will. This can be done through paint, such as, one of the things that we've done, painting a creek channel over top where the buried creeks are flowing, or through art, sculpture, and dance to kind of represent these underground waters. So what are some of the benefits of stream daylighting to our waterways? Water and air quality. So culverts, which are piping these streams, can actually kind of speed up water velocities when you think about kind of the smooth concrete pipes, increasing erosion and transporting nutrients and pollutants downstream. Whereas our natural creeks actually clean nutrients and pollutants through the new vegetation that is now growing along this uncovered stream, through deposition and through groundwater infiltration. And also these new riparian forests that we're creating can also filter out air pollution. They can kind of act as the lungs of the city, if you will. These new riparian forests are also creating critical riparian habitat. Here in Utah, about 80% of our species rely on riparian ecosystems, ecosystems adjacent to waterways during a portion of their life cycle. However, this habitat only makes up about 1.2% of our total land area here. So you can kind of imagine just how critical this habitat is, but just how little land area it takes up. We have neotropical migratory birds traveling from South America to Canada that rely on these habitats. The Salt Lake Valley with the Great Salt Lake, which our valley is named after, and Utah Lake, which is a freshwater lake here, sort of near the Salt Lake Valley. It's a major stopping point for those neotropical migratory birds. And these habitats really support the resting and refuel of those birds. The streams can also decrease habitat fragmentation by creating wildlife corridors and improving passage for fish. They can improve our quality of life by adding a visual attraction, creating a sense of place, masking kind of those sights and sounds of the urban city. They provide access to nature for nature-starved urban families and children, which we're learning more and more is critical to our children's development and critical for our mental and physical well-being. These creeks also can create cooling effects that help to mitigate the urban heat island effect. And they provide gathering space for festivals, celebrations, or just hanging out. Daylighting can improve property values and business revenues. There's a really incredible daylighting project in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is about an $18 million project. So pretty expensive. But yet it generates about $12 million each year in revenue from festivals that they host in this new kind of gathering space that they've created. So it's nearly paid for itself in the first year. These projects can facilitate surrounding development as people want to live by and locate their businesses by these beautiful waterways. And many communities are actually finding it cheaper to remove the aging infrastructure that these creeks are contained in and actually just daylighting the creeks rather than kind of replacing that aging infrastructure. These creeks can become living laboratories for surrounding schools to study the benefits of having streams that run through our cities. They can basically be connections for our communities. Here in the Salt Lake Valley, we have excellent north to south trails that traverse our Salt Lake Valley, but we don't really have anything that kind of connects those two north to south trails east to west. And that the way that these creeks flow, as you'll see, they flow east to west, and they can create that connection for us between the Wasatch Range on the east side of our valley and the Jordan River, which connects kind of through the heart of our valley, right down the middle. It's this range to river connection is what we like to call it. And these creeks can also provide opportunities to fish, access to outdoor recreation. There was a study that found that trail users save about $500 each year in reduced medical costs. And then finally, resiliency. So culverts, these pipes that are containing our creeks, create choke points in our stormwater system, where flood debris can actually become obstructed on those pipes, and then the creeks can actually flood up and over onto our streets. So through daylighting these creeks, we can actually remove those choke points and work to slow down water velocities through kind of the meanders and the rough and rocky and vegetated banks. And when we include a floodplain in these projects, floodwaters can basically spread out and seep into the ground in those floodplains. So as a way to kind of frame our discussion today in my presentation, I always like to kind of start with the story of the Salt Lake Valley's hydrology. So we're going to start in 1914, but I always like to mention that in no way is this the beginning of the story. Indigenous peoples of the Salt Lake Valley stewarded these streams for centuries upon centuries, fishing and hunting along the creeks, foraging vegetation along the banks, drinking that snowmelt runoff, and using these creek corridors for travel and trade. So the year is 1914. We've just completed a massive water infrastructure project. The combination of 50 years of tapping and taming City Creek, the creek is now buried, as you can see. To protect water supply, according to the Planning Commission. Fast forward to 1983, the combination of a large snowpack and a fast spring melt causes City Creek to come barreling down the canyon, bringing with it boulders, even whole trees. This flood debris catches at a choke point in the system, a culvert, and as I mentioned, the flooding goes up and over onto the street. Wooden pedestrian bridges were built. Canoers and kayakers came to take advantage of this new recreational feature in the Salt Lake Valley. And it was even rumored that a cutthroat trout was caught in this new State Street River, the river that was flowing down State Street through downtown Salt Lake City. After 14 days, the flooding eventually dried up, the wooden pedestrian bridges dismantled, and the millions of sandbags that were creating this river channel picked up at a cost of about $34 million countywide. In 1995, a new paradigm emerged. A creek channel was carved into a former surface parking lot at the corner of North Temple and State Street, turning gray. To green, City Creek was allowed to pool again, bringing in people, plants, and wildlife. People come here to celebrate or just relax in this natural oasis right in the heart of downtown Salt Lake City. And to kind of further frame our work in this discussion, I just wanted to highlight a few examples of daylighting from across the country as a way to kind of show that this isn't just a local initiative here in the Salt Lake Valley, but truly one of kind of global scale. So the Sawmill River in Yonkers, New York, is one of the most ambitious daylighting projects in terms of size and scale. The river was buried in the 1920s, due to rapid urbanization that was coming up from New York City at the time. And the project started as a surface parking lot. So it goes with many of these efforts. So through EPA funding, about 15,000 feet of new aquatic habitat was created. An endangered eel species has actually since colonized the new creek channel. A number of ecological workshops and musical performances are held here, and the project even comes with free Wi-Fi for a price tag of about $19 million. Another project in Seattle's Northgate neighborhood took advantage of a surface parking lot, so it goes, which was adjacent to essentially a suburban style mall. In the 1950s, a parking lot was constructed and the creek was essentially filled in. However, in the early 2000s, revitalization initiatives highlighted the location essentially because of its adjacency to a regional transit hub. And the parking lot truly kind of sat empty for much of the year. So in 2009, the creek was brought to the surface in what's called the Thornton Creek Water Quality Channel. And it uses a series of swales and pools to essentially slow and treat rainwater and stormwater. And it's achieved about a 40 to 80% reduction in total suspended solids, meaning that this facility is essentially capturing all of that soil and sediment in the water and retaining that rather than allowing it to flow downstream. It also provides habitat for birds, insects, and other wildlife, a number of pedestrian trails, and this really cool art kind of weave and blend into the natural space. And it's generated about $200 million in surrounding property development, which you can see with those kind of high rises in the left-hand and background of the screen. So what's kind of the scope of our hydrology here in the Salt Lake Valley? So you see here those 7 creeks, City Creek, Red Butte Creek, Emigration, Parley's, Mill Creek, Big Cottonwood, and Little Cottonwood Creeks. There's kind of 3 colors going on. So the red portions of the streams are all portions which are buried underground. That kind of greenish yellow color are creeks that have been impaired, meaning that their water quality is degraded in some way. And then the blue portions would be those sections which we might consider quote unquote acceptable. I will say that some of these sections aren't actually measured in terms of their water quality, so we don't quite know the impact at this point in time. So in total, we have about 21 miles of buried creek and about 79 miles of impaired waterway. So what are some of the projects that we're doing to help improve this condition? The Three Creeks Confluence is an effort to uncover and restore the convergence of Red Butte, Emigration, and Parley's Creeks where they meet the Jordan River in Salt Lake City. This is a look at the location. It's, if you're at all familiar with Salt Lake, 9th West and California Ave. That blue circle is kind of the previous condition of the site. Here's a look at kind of the current conditions or the previous conditions. I'm still getting used to that. We're roughly looking east down 1300 South in Salt Lake City. The pipes in the middle of the screen are those that are conveying those creeks, and the Jordan River is the kind of water source at the bottom of the screen. So it's essentially a dead end right of way of 1300 South and surface parking lot. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can't quite see it, but there is kind of this burned down, condemned home that we acquired in 2016 and demolished to incorporate into the project. So as I mentioned, this 100 years of daylighting document, which kind of spurred the creation of our organization. This is where the Three Creeks Confluence project originated, as kind of the capstone or demonstration of stream daylighting here in the Salt Lake Valley. As students in 2014, we presented this vision, this idea, this concept to a former council member of the district, Kyle Lamaffa, who is now our board chair and has since left the city council, Salt Lake City Council. And he truly helped the city departments champion the project, namely the Parks and Public Lands Department here in Salt Lake City. So in partnership with the Parks Department, we hosted 3 workshops to engage residents in the design of the project. And in addition to that, the Seven Canyons Trust hosted kind of a creative community engagement effort, which worked to engage residents kind of on their own time. So we used what we call urban intervention, which are low-cost, short-term projects to catalyze long-term change, to build support for the project and to solicit that feedback. And they all kind of worked in conjunction with each other. So the first was to partner with the surrounding community to paint a creek channel over top the buried creeks at the project site, which you see here. We used a series of prompts, starting with kind of the cheeky, this would be a good spot for a creek, to essentially move people through this creek channel and along the creek channel and kind of promote exploration of the space. This was followed by the second piece, which was a large chalkboard, which we rolled out at community celebrations to essentially gather thoughts and ideas for the project. And then the third and final piece was a temporary sculpture, which was intended to kind of represent the underground waters. So it was done by 2 local artists, Wendy Wisher and John Mack, and it featured 3 bridges representing those 3 creeks. They all came together, kind of representing that confluence. And on top, the bridges created this kind of like little community stage. So when we put it on site, we actually invited the community to come down and we hosted an open mic for community members to share poetry, song, and then feedback about the project. So this was paired with an open interpretive dance jam hosted by another great nonprofit here in the Salt Lake Valley called Love Dance More. So this community engagement effort, these 3 interventions, and then those 3 workshops hosted by Salt Lake City, along with the design, which I'll show you in just a second here, won a Utah American Planning Association award as well. In addition to those interventions, we also used environmental education as a tool to build support and raise awareness for the project. So we hosted a number of different student groups on site through one of our programs called the Seven Creeks Walk Series, which is kind of modeled after the Jane Jacobs Walk kind of concept, which helped to involve youth in the actual designing of the project, and also meaningful on-the-ground restoration work to remove noxious weeds, restore habitat value, and kind of clean up trash at the site. So here's a look at kind of the before condition of the site. So you see that kind of parking lot right in the middle of the screen, that dead end right of way. And then on the left side of that little parking lot is that abandoned home, which was demolished in 2016. So from this to this, so this is the design of the project. The main feature obviously is the restored stream channel in what we call kind of a delta design. And our idea here was to basically slow down and spread out the water as it was flowing out of the pipe. And this new channel can actually handle up to a 1 in 500 year flood. There's also kind of a low flow channel down the center in kind of lower flow conditions throughout the year. There are 2 new bridges on site. The first was to increase access to fishing, which is the bridge right in the middle of the screen, kind of going left to right, labeled as the fishing bridge. And then the second bridge, which kind of flows down through the bottom of the screen, is a connection between the site to the Jordan River Trail, which is on the other side of the Jordan River, which is a 50-mile trail connecting 3 counties from Utah Lake to the Great Salt Lake. There is also a number of different restoration areas throughout the site and a plaza space for programming, environmental education programming, as well as concerts, festivals, and events. So after 7 years of working on this project, originally proposing it again as students back in 2014, we managed to secure over $3 million for the construction of the design. And we officially opened the park in June 2021 and celebrated that success with over 1,000 residents at the opening celebration. It was truly an incredible experience. And I just would love to share some before and after photos so you can kind of truly see the transformation of the site. So we have our first photo point, before, after. Our second photo point, this is looking kind of northeast down the project, before and after. Our third photo point, which is looking at the from the other side of the bank, looking kind of southeast, we have the before and after. And here is a good point to kind of point out one of my favorite parts of the project, which we actually didn't have included in the original design. But on each side of the fishing bridge, which is that bridge that was going east to west, kind of left to right on the design slide. On either side of those bridges, you can see these beautiful community art pieces. So these were all 2D designs submitted from artists on the west side within this neighborhood of Salt Lake City, which we laser cut into kind of the metal on the bridges. And the designs all tell narratives about the community, the importance of our hydrology, and kind of the wildlife that depends on these areas. And these designs, if you go kind of later in the day, they create these beautiful shadows on the surface of the fishing bridge. It's quite a wonderful experience. And then our final photo point before our aerial image, before, this is looking again at that kind of current condition photo we saw, looking directly east at the piped sections of creek, before, and then after. And then our aerial image before and after. This is another good point to stop. The other kind of part that I love about this design, which is just on the left-hand side of the screen, is a nature play space that we created. And the trees that we used in the design were actually salvaged from the site. So there was a large kind of dead Fremont cottonwood tree that had to come down for safety reasons. But we were able to incorporate that tree and those logs into the play space. And then some of the other trees were all pine trees, which blew down in the Salt Lake City cemetery after a huge windstorm that we had a few years ago. So we were able to actually salvage those trees and incorporate them in a really fun, really popular way in the park. Kind of the next steps on the project. So during construction of the project, the landowner to the north of the site came to us asking if Salt Lake City was interested in purchasing this beautiful historic home. The city agreed and managed to acquire the property. And so over the next couple of years, we will be working with Salt Lake City to help hopefully renovate this beautiful historic home and kind of turn it into a community and nature center to facilitate programming and have a space for environmental education to bring students to the site and truly learn about kind of our hydrology here in the Salt Lake Valley. Some of our other projects that we've been working on, Herman Franks Park, which is an effort to daylight Emigration Creek to activate, supplement, and enhance the current uses at Herman Franks Park in Salt Lake City without disrupting them at all. Another look at that location. So it's 13th South and 7th East in Salt Lake City. Kind of that blue square is the boundaries of Herman Franks Park. Here's a look at the current conditions. The project is essentially looking at this kind of grassy Kentucky bluegrass buffer space along the 8th East and 1300 South, the streets that kind of border the park space. The project actually originated in a Westminster College course. So again, incorporating students in this visioning process where these students were studying the hydrology of Emigration Creek, which flows above ground through their campus, and then actually following the creek as it goes out of their campus, and pretty much right outside of their campus, it goes underground into a culvert. And they followed the underground creek under roads, the surrounding neighborhood, and then through this green space, Herman Franks Park. And they were really excited about the opportunity to uncover the creek through this green space and helped brainstorm ideas on how to move the project forward. And that led us to partnering with a local landscape architect firm called Bachholt Landscape Architecture to help us create a design for the idea. We hosted 2 community design workshops. The first to kind of gather overall feedback on themes for the project, and the second to gather feedback on 2 design concepts that we created to create a preferred design, which I'll show you. So again, we're kind of looking at the current condition of the site. Again, the park is up in that kind of upper right-hand portion of the screen with the 3 ball fields that you can see. So from this to this, we created kind of a phased approach for this project. So the first phase would take place within the boundaries of Herman Franks Park, and it would feature a 1,000-foot new stream channel with restored riparian and upland natural areas, an upgraded playground and amenities for the baseball diamonds, and a living laboratory to kind of study the benefits of the daylighting project. And then the second phase is kind of this pie in the sky idea. So through this project, we wanted to really challenge the notion that oftentimes our natural spaces and our waterways give way to the car. And what happens when we quite literally flip that on its head and actually put the cars underneath our streams and natural areas and give precedence back to kind of the people, plants, and water. So in this concept, we have proposed to kind of ramp down 7th East, the street flowing kind of, or the street running right along the bottom hand portion of the screen, and actually have it go underneath a new stream channel, which would flow across the intersection at grade. And this would create essentially a connected green space in the heart of downtown Salt Lake City, about 80 acres of green space in the heart of our city. So the next kind of steps for this project would be to solicit city support. Salt Lake City is the landowner of the park space. And we created a master plan to kind of lay out our best case of support for why the city might support this project. The next project I wanted to mention is what's called the Folsom Corridor. So this is an effort to revitalize an abandoned rail corridor into a thriving riparian ecosystem and connection between West Side neighborhoods and downtown Salt Lake City. So again, a look at the location. The corridor would go from 4th West and North Temple to essentially the Jordan River and 2nd South. Here's a look at the kind of current conditions. As I mentioned, it was a former rail line called the Folsom Rail Line. The tracks were removed in 2008, and the corridor was kind of left in this neglected and degraded condition. So to build support for this project and raise awareness, we again came to this idea of urban intervention, in which we installed a series of wayfinding signs, which all followed kind of two narratives going east to west. The signs gave information about the daylighting project, so the daylighting of City Creek through the corridor, and then the opposite direction, west to east, the narrative followed the connections that a future trail would make. In addition to those wayfinding signs, which you see kind of on either side of the screen, we created a series of pavement markings at the bottom hand portion of the screen to essentially demarcate the corridor for the community to essentially begin to explore the potential for the project. And we hosted a number of different walks through our Seven Creeks Walk Series program to engage the community and kind of discuss opportunities for the corridor. This was successful in building tons of momentum for the project. So we have completed construction of the Folsom Trail through the corridor, which was completed in December of last year. And it'll connect a key kind of transit station, a light rail station, which we call the front runner here in Salt Lake County, to the Jordan River Trail, which is a major active transportation network. And in addition to that, we completed a feasibility study for the daylighting of City Creek in the summer of 2020, which explored the potential of daylighting City Creek in kind of two different concepts. The first was to create a partial daylighting of the creek in kind of a low flow channel. And the second was to uncover the full flow of City Creek in a much larger channel. Over the past year or so, we've raised about $200,000 in partnership with Salt Lake City Redevelopment Agency to create a design master plan that would pursue that partial daylighting concept, which was deemed most feasible by our city partners. So we are in the process of hiring a consultant to assist our organization with creating this design, and we'll begin probably in the next couple of weeks, essentially a year-long process to design the daylighting of City Creek, at which point we would bring the project up to kind of the construction phase. And we'll need to raise a whole bunch of money to implement that project. And then the final project, which I wanted to highlight, is our 7 Greenways vision plan. So this is an effort to capture the collective imagination and the creation of greenway corridors along those 7 creeks. So here again is that scope, and you've seen this map a couple times now. So you see those 7 creeks. The plan will essentially highlight opportunity areas in each of these 7 greenways. It'll recommend best management practices, policies to help implement these projects, and will include a toolbox of design concepts and guidelines. So we received a Wasatch Front Regional Council Transportation and Land Use Connection grant for about $135,000. And the really exciting thing for us was all 8 of the streamside municipalities, so the cities in which these creeks flow along, in Salt Lake County, both provided a letter of support, but also matching funds for the project, which meant to us that all 8 of these cities in Salt Lake County are truly buying into this vision to create these 7 greenways. So the process started with an analysis of the existing conditions of the greenways. The second phase was our community visioning phase, and we hosted 15 different pop-up workshops at parks and open spaces throughout the Salt Lake Valley, and had also an online platform to gather feedback on goals, recommendations, and different opportunity areas. And now we are in our kind of third phase, which is the drafting of our 7 Greenways vision plan, which we've published a 90% draft of that document on our project website, which if you're at all curious, I'd recommend go checking out. The website is 7greenwaysvisionplan.org, and are really excited to kind of publish that full document, and then working with all 8 of those cities in Salt Lake County to implement the opportunity areas and the recommendations therein. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. And I will give you a second if you want to write down any of that information, and then I'll stop sharing my screen.
That was great, Brian. Thank you so much. I have a page full of questions, which is not a surprise. Firstly, I finally understand what daylighting means.
Good.
I've heard 100 years of daylighting. So daylighting means bringing what's underground up to light, to bring up. So we have here in northeastern Pennsylvania, we have a river, like the Lackawanna River that you and I had chatted about earlier, that runs through our valley. And I'm very interested now I'm wondering how underground streams and creeks, and we have things we call roaring brook, things that feed. So if you drew the line of the Lackawanna River, I'm wondering, almost like the roots that probably are underground that are feeding into that river that we don't see, that would be really interesting to find a map of our underground creeks, and to think about the concept of finding one of those creeks under a parking lot that isn't really, an abandoned parking lot's even better. And then, turning it into this beautiful environmental ecosystem for the community to enjoy, and to clean the water and bring plant and animal and wildlife back. It's wonderful because, we're trying to always think about ways to green our city. But the problems we face with greening a city sometimes, like we want to just do one up, like over the summer, we're going to do an urban intervention in a parking space, a parklet. And I've already gotten pushback, like, oh, people don't want to give up that parking space. It's critical to whatever. But if you take a spot like in a parking lot or someplace out off of, like, you're not interfering with commerce in any way. You're just basically taking these interventions around the city that no one would even know sometimes that there's an underground water source there, and just bringing it to daylight. I think it's so simple. Now, did you first learn about daylighting in your classroom, like in a course with Stephen Goldsmith, environmental? Yep. And as you were talking, I Googled daylighting of streams around the country. So it seems like it's becoming, is there like a national daylighting group, or is it just, are all these nonprofits working individually around the country and the world probably doing this work?
There used to be a great website, which I don't know if it's still around, which was run out of actually the UK, which I think it was daylighting.uk.org maybe, or something like that, which had compiled tons and tons of, on an international scale,
Huh.
these precedents for daylighting. So that was a resource that we used as students to
Students, yeah.
compile a bunch of precedents, which we have a few of those on our website, but certainly don't have the capacity to compile all of these just truly incredible projects. So if that website's still around, I'd recommend that one. But it was run by a graduate student at the time who was doing a thesis on stream daylighting, and his name was Adam Broadhead. So he also might be a resource. I think he has a Twitter that he runs.
I have a question from a faculty member here, and his name is Miguel, and he said, wonderful, beautiful. Could you explain a little more about who and how the performance is done, the maintenance? So once the areas are in place, right, you provide these beautiful gifts, a gift really truly to the community. How do you keep that? How do you maintain it? Are they self-maintaining in many ways, or is there a commitment to keep them up?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and will be, as you work through these projects, is something that often comes up right at the beginning of these projects is who will maintain these projects. So it's a key consideration that needs to be done really, really early in the process. So with the Three Creeks project, we were fortunate in that we had a lot of support from the Parks and Public Lands Department here in Salt Lake City, who has committed to maintaining the project. So they do all of the maintenance and all of that stuff for the project. With that being said, one of the things that we asked the Parks Department really early in the process, and kind of ramped up those efforts during construction, is asking the city and the Parks Department to give us a list of maintenance tasks that we could accomplish with volunteers. So we are very routinely running volunteer groups through the project, first and foremost, to just share the success of the project with them, to show them around, to kind of teach them about their hydrology. But at the end of all of our education events, we do kind of a meaningful restoration project, on the ground kind of restoration project. So that could be, things like picking up trash. It could be removing noxious weeds. It could also be working to plant or seed to increase habitat value. And so with that list of tasks from the maintenance department, we can actually, take these volunteers and facilitate a way to have them participate in this meaningful on the ground project, which is actually also accomplishing key maintenance tasks for the city. In the hope that we can basically free up resources of the Parks Department, who has tons of responsibilities with all of the parks and natural areas in Salt Lake City, to focus on on parks that might need a little bit more TLC, that maybe doesn't have a group that is so invested in the maintenance of the Three Creeks Confluence project. But it's something that we're just beginning on our Folsom Corridor project. Maintenance plan is one of the deliverables for this design master plan process that we'll be basically engaging with over the next year. So it's a really, truly kind of critical consideration, and should be addressed right at the beginning of the project.
There's a couple more questions, but I wanted to ask one myself as well. So advice to our students. So we are designing a project that we would love to see come to fruition and become a reality, right? So as students of design, what would your advice be to create engagement with the community? So for example, if you had your councilman that was, you pitched your concept to, did you invite that council person, that councilman, to be in on the design process? Did you work with him as a student, or did you basically, a group of students came up with the idea and then you went to city council and you said, here's an idea, and you happened to found you found a friend on city council who believed in the project and helped you usher it through and start to get the funding needed and all that kind of stuff? Or did you work with them, that city council person, right out of the gate? And did they come into your studio and work with you in school? Like what level do you start to engage with that community partner?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, these projects require champions.
Right.
We were incredibly fortunate to find a champion as an elected official, a city council member, who was truly integral in helping to, get the city departments involved in the project. He had tons of clout, right? So he could go to the city department, Parks and Public Lands, the planning department, whatever it may be, and say, this is a really great idea. You should listen to these students, or let's take this idea and kind of run with it. So I think it was incredibly fortunate to find that champion at that level. In terms of how the class was set up, was we would bring in experts from the community to kind of teach us about their work, to learn from them, and then a few of those representatives we kind of bounced ideas off of, and that was one of the ideas behind the Three Creeks Confluence project was kind of bouncing site plans and renderings off of these community experts. And they gave us feedback, maybe you should consider this. That's not going to fly. So we got really, really valuable feedback from those representatives. And then basically took that package and presented it to Kyle, as students. And that was, the first time that he was seeing it. But again, was fortunate that he took us seriously, right? He didn't have to. So I think it's truly about finding a champion,
finding partners. Yeah, it seems like that, right? So anywhere from an expert to like we just went through a series with our historian and an environmental scientist who happens to be one of but they're both on Marywood's faculty, and then also going into the community, working with leaders in the community and even business people, developers, other nonprofits. It sounds like the more partnerships that you can get in on understanding your projects, the more successful of a shot you have at actually making it happen. It makes sense. So very similar process to the way we approach things. I'm going to ask a couple from the Q&A. So here's a question from Mark, one of our students. How do you decide the balance of old/new? Meaning, what do you keep, right? And what do you get rid of when you're designing a daylighting project?
I think I would answer that by saying that's a key question you have to ask the community. What do they really value? What do they want to keep? So I think that question is best answered by the surrounding community. And then, you need to consider other things like, is there historic contamination? Other considerations as you're moving through the project, which will dictate what you can keep, what you need to remediate. But it truly depends on, what the context of the project is, what the community is wanting. And I'll give you an example with the Three Creeks Confluence project. You may have noticed that we had that right-of-way property, right? We had that burned down foreclosed home property, which is just to the north of that. And to the south of that is still, an auto shop.
Right, that's all the tires, right? The tires.
That's all the tires, exactly. Right. So as students, we're not inhibited by, private property issues and the like. So when we were designing the project, we imagined transforming that auto shop into kind of that community nature center, transforming it into not an auto shop, essentially. Right. As we got into the project and we asked the community what they wanted to see, they were really excited and were asking for that vacant home, which had burned down a few times, had graffiti all over it. They wanted that to go. So that kind of led us to that property, which we acquired, as I mentioned, in 2016, and sort of away from the auto shop property. However, with that being said, throughout the project, we were in conversation with the auto shop owner, just making him aware of the project, asking him to be engaged in the project if he was interested, trying to get his story of why that location, his story as a resident of the area, a local business owner. And we're also, figuring out if it would be possible to purchase that property. He was not interested in selling at that point. So kind of led us away from that property. So it kind of takes getting your hands dirty a little bit in the project to see how you might actually answer that question. And you may have some original thoughts that, maybe
that don't turn out right.
Exactly.
So you make an assumption, but then you go out and you test it into the neighborhood, and you actually hold those open conversations with the community, because you are stitching it into that fabric of that neighborhood. So those folks need to be involved in that decision, because they're going to be the ones ultimately taking ownership of it, right? So this is definitely, I can see why it's a grounds up sort of effort. It sounds like that engagement is everything, really, to the success of these projects. We only have like 3 minutes left, and we have a great question, just a comment. I think what you're doing is fantastic, Brian, in regards to bringing back green space to previously steamrolled urban areas. You're inspiring. There are people that push for a brighter future. That's from Quinn. Lois, again, incredibly interested in this, designing for the earth and animals at all forefront of humans. And then again, Sean, one of our faculty and also grad students, is thank you for taking the time. This is fantastic, and we're truly inspired by your work. So you're getting, I don't know if you could see all these or not, Brian, but let's see if I could just pick, let me see, Lois, let's see, it says, it's difficult to advocate for the animals and the earth that don't speak our language and have to rely on our voices to tell the stories. It seems like most cities only consider things that directly impact the citizens. So I guess it's just more of a commentary on, thank you for understanding all of the ecology and all the animals and plant life and everything that is made healthier by these interventions. Sean asked about how long does it take? I would imagine that's also one of those answers that are dependent upon the momentum and the support, right? Is there like, do you put a time limit on when you start and when you finish, you want to get this thing accomplished? Is that an easier answer to say how long?
It truly depends on what that, what the vision is, how big it is, so I guess as an example, the Three Creeks project, we presented that as students in 2014. Right away, we got about $60,000 to do the kind of city-led, Salt Lake City-led vision kind of community engagement process, which was these 3 vision workshops that took place kind of right away. After that process, which was probably 2016, 2017, the project stalled. And we had a design, but we were having trouble finding funding. We were having trouble, kind of moving the project along. So our answer to that was to program these series of urban interventions to help gain momentum for the project, bring it to the forefront of the community, get people thinking about the project again. And kind of stimulate it a little bit. So that process took place probably 2017 to 2018, 2019, at which point we, in 2019, secured the $3 million. We had some COVID funding scares, but ultimately that worked out. Started construction in 2020-ish, and then opened that up in 2021. So overall, that community engagement process took 4 years, maybe thereabouts. But again, this project was not in any city master plans.
Right.
There was no it was brand new in 2014.
Right.
A crazy vision from a bunch of students. So in terms of like, from a municipal standpoint, the project was incredibly fast. These projects, the Folsom Corridor project, for instance, was originally presented in 1992. So we're talking about almost 3 decades
of concepts and ideas.
Planning,
and then,
feasibility studies,
right.
And we just finished the construction of the trail in December 2021. So took almost 29 years for anything to happen on that project.
Right.
We began to do our urban intervention process and community engagement process around 2017, 2018, which I'd like to think helped spur movement on the project and get people excited and thinking about it.
People start to see actually something happening, then they get excited about it, and then they get behind it. Brian, that's a perfect place to end with your success, and I can continue to talk to you for a very long time. And thank you so much for being here with us and for talking to the students. And if you all have more questions and you want to follow Brian at sevencanyonstrust.org, follow the work, get in touch with me if you want to have more specific questions to Brian. And you are really, all of your whole team, because I know it takes a team. I could ask questions about education. Just keep going, and we're going to keep doing our work here, and we're all going to eventually merge and become one ecosystem together. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to the AIA, Northeastern Pennsylvania. Thank you, Marywood University School of Architecture, and thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.